Everyone, folks on Zoom, thanks so much for joining. My name is Blair Cox. I'm a sixth-year PhD student in psychology and social intervention, and I'm here to talk a little bit about one of the projects that I work on that's called the PATH program. I'm here representing some work from myself, but also from a much larger team of researchers and practitioners and folks at New York City Public Schools. So always want to acknowledge that this is a big team to make this research practice partnership work. So today I'm presenting on our process of program adaptation, moving from an early elementary school model to a whole school model. Okay, I'm clicking. Perfect. So I'm going to talk quickly about why we need the PATH program, the intervention I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to give a brief overview. I'm going to then really talk about the process and our findings of program adaptation, and then highlight some key takeaways for us. So my goals for the session are really to share the systematic processes and findings of our program development and adaptation process, not dive really deeply into what our intervention is or things that we're going to be studying down the road. Really, I'm focused on expanding, scaling this to a whole school model. Okay, so what is the PATH program and why do we need it? First, this is a program designed for students with emotional disabilities in New York City. And students with emotional disabilities face a number of disparate outcomes compared to students without and to students with other special needs classifications. So first, Black students are twice as likely to be classified as having an emotional disability. And we see that Black boys especially are disproportionately likely to be classified as having emotional disabilities. We also see that students with emotional disabilities are much more likely to be in self-contained settings or exclusionary settings than students with other disabilities. And we see that students with emotional disabilities are more likely to be chronically absent and suspended than students with other disabilities. So recognizing these, we wanted to design an intervention. And really, we're targeted around services. We hope to change outcomes, and eventually we'd really like to change classification too. But the point that we could make the most change was around services. And in order to do that, we have to recognize that there are barriers to creating a trauma-informed, evidence-based, and contextually relevant intervention for students with emotional disabilities. First, there's no model of what equitable inclusion would look like for students with EDs. So we have some best practices in some programs, but we're really trying to generate in this space and understand what works best for these students and their communities and their families. We're also recognizing the lack of training that staff have in supporting students with EDs, the need for collaboration with families, the complexity of changing policies, and really recognizing that these students benefit from more scaffolded social emotional learning that's infused with trauma-informed practices. So kind of recognizing all of these barriers, we understood that partnership was the solution to designing a program that supported students and their families in neighborhood schools. So our program is a partnership between practitioners, so educators, researchers, families and community, and also policymakers. So we have a lot of partners doing different things, pulling in complementary expertise to make this program possible for students in schools. And our partnership, like I said, is explicitly between NYU and New York City Public Schools. This tells you a little bit about the delineation of responsibilities. We work super closely, but NYU, we have both a research and a practice team. So we have researchers and we have educators that are doing coaching and consulting. And New York City Public Schools has folks who are embedded in the New York City Office of Special Education that are designing policies to be aligned with New York City, already existing policies that are funding the program, supporting with hiring. And then we really work together to understand implementation and support the program to be as strong as it can be for educators and for students. So you might be saying, okay, she told me a little bit about why we need it, but what actually is the PATH program? It's an inclusion program in neighborhood schools. In New York City, students with special needs are often sent to a separate school district called District 75. These are separate schools that are traditionally more exclusionary. And so this is designed to create a classroom that has a general education and a special education teacher full-time, supporting students in a smaller class size, getting push-in support from occupational therapists and social workers. And it's really designed to elevate the emotional support for students in their neighborhood schools. So we're not changing anything about curriculum. We're not changing the what is taught. We're changing some of the ways of how it's taught and the connection students have to each other, to their teachers, and to their school. So this data comes from last year, and last year we were in 6 elementary schools, which included 19 elementary classrooms. The program starts in kindergarten and then moves up each grade as the students move up. This year we have students in 3rd and 4th grade, so the PATH program has been happening for about 5 years, which is super exciting. And then we also have a middle school program. Last year we had 6th and 7th, and this year we have 6th, 7th, and 8th. I'm going to be focusing in specifically on elementary school, but this gives you a little bit of a picture. And we're in all of the boroughs except for Staten Island. So hoping to expand as well. Okay, so we started, like I said, in K through 2 classrooms, and our goal is to understand how we need to adapt the program to meet the developmental needs, but also the kind of cadence of schooling in grades 3 through 5. We also want to think about integrating our practices into what New York City Public Schools calls cluster spaces, but like recess, like art, places that students might not be with their teacher or with their class, but they're still there during the school day. And then we also want to think about adopting practices school-wide so that it's not being in a PATH classroom, but it's being in a PATH school. And this was year 1 of a 4-year funded IES development grant with the goal in year 4 to do some quasi-experimental data collection to actually start to understand impact. So that's what we're working towards as we move forward. So what did we do for program adaptation? We thought about these mechanisms of feedback. Who can we learn from? How can we figure out how to adapt it? First, we recognize the experts that we already have on our partnership team, including researchers, educators, and folks that understand New York City Public Schools education policy. We also recognize that the school staff, they're the ones who are actually implementing the program on the day-to-day. They have the on-the-ground expertise of what this looks like in their schools. And we also brought together a community council representing a variety of community groups. So parents, we had some grandparents, some community-based mental health organizations, some parent advocacy groups, some folks at different levels in New York City Public Schools, to really try to get that complementary expertise and understand the voices that we were not hearing from our primary partnership team and the school staff. And the way that we actually collected this data was through both systematic meeting notes and focus groups. So we held regular meetings with our practice team and with our community council. We also held some focus groups with our school staff, and I'm going to focus in on those focus groups and on the systematic meeting notes today. So to start our focus groups, we held 4 focus groups in PATH schools. We had 2 schools participate in this, and we had groups that were K through 2 and 3 through 5. We had about 3 to 10 staff members in each group, and we used content analysis to understand the things they wanted us to know about adapting the program to grades 3 through 5. So what did we find? From our K through 2, they really talked about how to move this to whole school, thinking about the policies, the practices we had that worked well, and that they saw benefited students in their classroom. So they talked about the benefits of having consistent routines. They talked about wanting, we give a trauma-informed training, and they talked about wanting that at the start of the year. They got it at different periods throughout the year, and they said, really, I could hit the ground running if I had it at the start. They talked about wanting additional resources for family engagement. So I have a quote, if it will come up, here that says, it's talking really about the general gist of wanting parents to understand that being in the PATH program is a great opportunity. So this teacher says, if your child's chosen to be in PATH, it's almost like being accepted into a really great program, like an Ivy League. I would say or a scholarly program, because not everybody knows there's only 4 spots. Now your child's getting 2 teachers and extra support. So they end by saying the parents should look at it like this, like a blessing that they're getting accepted into the program. So they really talk about the way that we can promote positive messaging to parents as part of the program. They also talked about student selection, so really thinking about who is part of the program and who can have success in the program. And interestingly, they talked about incorporating academics with regulation, which we'll see come up in the grades 3 through 5 as well. So we have something called a movement break that's really focused around social emotional regulation. And they talked about integrating academic lessons into those movement breaks. And one of our teachers said, talk to the OTs because they're really professionals in something called motor learning. So that's something that they learn, but really thinking about how to use movement to help with academics. And so this is talking about both the team collaboration and the specific strategy of integrating social emotional learning and academics. And finally, they talked about the benefits of administrator buy-in and collaborative structures. So I didn't talk so much about them in the intro, but there are a number of collaborative structures to make sure the team can work as a team. And they talked about really appreciating those opportunities for collaboration and for planning that collaboration. So then we talked with our 3rd through 5th grade teachers, and they pointed out some similar things, but also important differences. They recognize that as you move up in elementary school, there's increasing time constraints and also testing pressure. So there are state tests, things start to get more competitive and more important, right, as kids age through elementary school. And that really plays out in what they can devote to social emotional learning. They also talked about how they use some social emotional learning already. And so that let us know, okay, there are things that we can build on that's already kind of in these teachers' wheelhouse. They pointed to lunch and also tests as times where there were increased dysregulation. So these are moments where there's a lot of socialization happening at lunch. Sometimes there's peer conflict. And so there's also a lot of energy happening at lunch. And so coming back into the classroom, having opportunities for regulation was important. And also with this increase of standardized kind of high stakes tests, they see more testing anxiety happening. And so they wanted us to really recognize that and build in opportunities for regulation around that. They also talked about wanting adaptable private versions of Community Circle, which is something many people do at the start of the day, but at different times, a kind of social emotional check-in, relationship building for the classroom that in K through 2 is done with the whole classroom. You're all together sharing. And so they said kids, they might not want to share the same way in grades 3 through 5. And so this teacher shared it's important for students to have different options of participating. Some of them might not feel comfortable in big groups, and maybe a small group or independent opportunities would be better for them. So that's something we're working on adapting based on that feedback. We also spoke with a community council and got a lot of interesting information from them. So in order to convene this community council, we crowdsourced a list of potential members. We then selected our members to have that complementary expertise, definitely our goal. And our final council included 2 district officials, 2 mental health and family engagement community-based organizations or CBOs, 1 caregiver, and 3 educators, as well as 2 youth advocates. And they met 3 times over the year to give targeted feedback. So we shared different parts of the PATH program to really hear their feedback, their expertise of what they liked, what they thought we could do better. And the things that they pointed out for us is really the important developmental things that are happening in 3rd to 5th grade. So they talked about increasing academic pressure, but also peer scrutiny. So recognizing at this age, peers become more important and they can be positive, but they can also be negative in some senses. And so paying attention to that and supporting positive social interactions amongst peers is increasingly important. And so again, they highlighted the need for different forms of regulation, making sure students can do things independently, making sure there's no stigma around emotion regulation in the classroom. They also thought about ways that we can integrate peers into social and academic processes in the classroom. So thinking about peer tutoring, thinking about peer learning, thinking about peer regulation as an opportunity as well. They also talked about using PASS strategies as tier 1, and this means a strategy using it for the whole classroom. So one student might need extra support, but let's give that support to the whole class so that that student doesn't feel singled out. Everybody can benefit from that support, and it helps the class community and sense of belonging. They also talked about the benefits of family advocacy groups to build family engagement and community. So in grades 3 through 5, parents often don't participate in school events as much. As students age, we see that parents engage less. Part of that is that their child is used to school, they're used to school, right? but that parents can really be advocates for each other. And so that's one of the great recommendations that the community council gave to us. So our key takeaways, summarizing it for you all, adapting path to upper elementary school requires increased academic and social emotional integration. So recognizing that we need both of these things, how can we do them simultaneously in some places in our program? We also recognize that peers can be sources of both academic and social emotional support, especially when supported and kind of scaffolded by teachers and educators in the classroom. We also recognize that this model, whole school model, really means meaningful inclusion of families, and that there are multiple ways of doing this, but connecting families is one of the most important ways. So not just a teacher connecting with parents, but parents connecting with parents. And our next steps is actually applying these findings to our strategy guide, which is similar to an implementation manual. So we've been doing that this year so that people can have, a physical copy. There'll also be a website version of all of the practices in the PATH program and how they apply to early elementary, upper elementary, and the whole school model. Okay, thank you so much.
Does anyone have any initial questions? I do.
Let's hear them.
I'm interested to understand what the peer support looks like in early elementary school, like in a classroom.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we're still working on. But there's a lot of evidence about peer tutoring that like close age peers in elementary school can really be beneficial. And so even in something, it doesn't have to be so structured, but even something like somebody in your classroom who might be a little bit ahead of you in math, sitting with you, you're working together, you're learning from their ability too, and they can support you through it. So you might not formally label it as tutoring, right? There might be some tutoring opportunities, but really it's just people at different levels learning together brings everybody up. And so that's the idea academically. And socially, really it's recognizing that the teacher is doing a lot of the co-regulation with students. But as many of us know, our friends really provide that co-regulation, in high school and adulthood and so on. And so encouraging students to do regulation activities together, to say, hey, I'm recognizing, in kid language that you're feeling this way, that this is making you upset. Why don't we take a break and go to the calm corner together, right? So some of those norms around peer interaction and social emotional learning too. Yeah. And then those are like the in the classroom ways, but we're definitely trying to promote like some different club activities, some different sport activities, some student leadership on the peer level too of different classroom activities. So that's something that we're still kind of manifesting into real practices in the classroom.